thank you for choosing to visit us today.
No, I'm delighted.
Glad to see you. We're very glad to host you on the other side of the chambers. So, I thought to begin, going back in time, you grew up in Dundee in the post-World War II era.
Right.
What was that like?
A hell of a lot more healthy than it is now, quite frankly, because it was a time of, well, it was tricky to start with. We were just recovering from the war, so we still had rationing when I was a kid. My dad was a grocer. He actually did rather well out of the war. And it was interesting. My family had we had a tough time, actually, initially. My dad died when I was 8, and that was in 1955. And my mother had a series of nervous breakdowns, which made her incapacitated for most of my childhood. But that being said, there were things on the move that paid off for me when we got to the 60s. I wasn't even aware of it because I was still a kid. But I was very lucky. I was very blessed in the fact that I had two great teachers at my school. I mean, I wasn't in their class, and I sort of failed everything. I used to get, I would get 100% in geography, and then I'd get 75% take home for untidiness. No, it's true, that's the way it was. So I weathered that. But these two guys one was called George Hackett, and the other one was called Bill Dewar. And there had been a young man who was working at the Dundee Rep, which is where I ended up working. And he was going to drama school, so his job was available. This was in 1961. And Bill said, well, why don't you go for this job? And I was very nervous about it because I'd only ever been to this was the Dundee Repertory Theatre where he worked. And I'd only ever been to a live theatre just beginning of that year, from 14. Through Bill, we had a thing called the Rep Club, and we used to go every Wednesday to see the plays, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, I'd already had this huge experience, which I'll talk about later, of the cinema. I mean, I was wedded to the cinema ever since I was this high. And it was the best experience ever for me going to my hometown at that time, we had 21 cinemas. You know, you don't have 21 cinemas anymore. And there were cinemas, it was a great diversity of what was going on, and there were double features. So that was my grounding in acting, was to see these wonderful movies of the 50s. But I always adhered to American movies. I couldn't quite get with English movies. They were a bit alien to me, but American movies seemed more like, there's something about the egalitarian nature of American movies. Anything was possible. And so the comedians like Danny Kaye, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Martin and Lewis, Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And then on the other side of that was this amazing thing that was burgeoning at the time, which was a kind of new drama that was coming out of people like Elia Kazan. So there were films like On the Waterfront or East of Eden, and these, directed both by Elia Kazan. And these were amazing things to be subjected to when I was very young. So I kind of was set on the course of being an actor, and it was only until I saw, when I was 14, because I thought, I'm not American, it'll never happen to me, it couldn't possibly happen to me. But then I saw a film called Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, in about 1961 at the Plaza Cinema in the hill town of Dundee. And there was this young guy, aggressive, incredible, charismatic, very positive player called Albert Finney. And Albert was like, we eventually became friends, but it was like a huge light went on, that what was possible I could see on the screen. If he could do that, and also he had spots, I had spots, we sort of looked alike, we were not. So that set me on my course. And meanwhile, Bill had got me this interview for this job. So nervously, I went down to the theatre, and I have to talk in the Dundonian vernacular, if you excuse me for a bit. I don't know if there are any Scots in the building, but anyway, so I I went down and I went to the front, and the lady at the front says, "What you wanting, son?" And I said, I'm here for an interview. "Oh yeah, what is that for?" I said, I'm going to meet Mr. Henderson. This was the guy who's the director. He said, "Oh, aye." He said, "Well, if you want to come in the front, you've got to go in the back." I said, "Yeah, no, you can't get to the front for the back. You can't get to the front for the front. You can only get to the front for the back. So you've got to go in the back. When you get to the back, you then can come to the front. And when you come to the front, you go up the stairs and you'll see him." And I followed that confusedly. And I said, "Oh, so I go around the back." "Yeah, go in the back. When you go in the back, you come at the front. When you come at the front, you go up the stairs. But when you come out, you can't come out the front. You've got to go out the back to come around the front again." I said, "Yes, okay, I'll do that." So I went round the back of the theatre, and as I walked in the door, there were these two guys having a stand-up row, and they were threatening one another, and there was a very, very strong smell of alcohol at 9:30 in the morning, which struck me as a bit odd, to say the least. And they were shouting and screaming at one another, and they were, one of those things, when people threaten to fight, but they don't actually hit one another. "You fucking, you don't know, I'm fucking you want that." And this was going on. I thought, Christ almighty, where am I? So I was trying to get past them to get up to where I was to go on to the front to have this interview. And I kind of went up the stairs and got past these guys, and there was a guy standing there smoking a cigarette, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you all right, darling?" And I thought to myself, here, two guys knocking hell on one another down there, and somebody calls me darling. Well, clearly this is the place that I should be. So I immediately felt relaxed, and I thought, well, but then I had to have the interview. So I went through into the office, and there was this very nice New Zealand guy called John Henderson, who was a producer of the theatre. He didn't direct the plays, but he ran the theatre. And he asked me, he said, "So I see you were at this school, St. Michael's, which is the school I was at." I said, "Yes," the same as Frank, who's just leaving us. I said, "Yes, that's right, yes." He said, "So are you interested in the theatre?" I said, "Oh, yes, very interested in the theatre." He said, "And what is your favorite subject? What kind of music do you like?" And I sort of panicked, and I just previously that week, our music teacher at the school had played the trumpet march from Aida's Verdi's Aida, rather, sorry. And so I kind of sat there and I said, "Well, I like Verdi." I said, I'm really fond of Verdi. I think Verdi is he's really good. He's a great composer. He said, "What particular piece of Verdi do you like?" And I went, "The trumpet march from Aida. That's really good. I really like that." And he knew I was talking total bullshit. So anyway, I got the job, and that's how I started at Dundee Rep. And it was the best time ever. But again, it was the beginning of the 60s. So, with my family disasters that had happened, I came to a point where that was really interesting. And I worked at the Rep for 2 years, and I served my time there. So I was there from the age of 15 to the age of 17. And finally, there came the time when I was going to go to drama school. And what happened was, there was this guy we had 3 directors during that time. We had a director called Tony Page, we had a director called Piers Haggard, and then we had this third guy who was called William Davis. And Bill Davis was Canadian, and I don't know if anybody's watched the X-Files. Have you seen the X-Files? Well, he played the smoking man in the X-Files, and very nice guy, young. He was very young. He was only 24. And he said to me, "Brian, would you like to go to a voice class?" And I went, "A voice class?" I didn't even know what a voice class was. And I said, "Well, sure, great." And he said, "Yeah, we've got this colleague of ours," because he'd been at this school called Lambda. She's coming from Lambda, and she's on her way up to visit her family in Wick. She was from the northeast of Scotland. And I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Yeah. She's going to come and give us a voice class." And it was a lady called Kristen Linklater. whose father was a famous writer at the time called Eric Linklater, and her brother was he was the editor of the Scotsman eventually. So I went into this voice class not knowing what was going to happen, and she did these series of exercises, and it was a revelation about how you create your voice. The fact that you work from what they call their center, so it's all diaphragmatically based, so it's all from here. You never allow this to get in the way. You keep that thing going, that energy going from here, from the solar plexus, right through, and you create the sound, and the sound becomes untrammeled because it doesn't get caught in the voice, and it plays through the vocal cords. So you expand the voice at the same time. And this was a revelation. I mean, for a 15-year-old, it was positively mind-blowing. And so I decided that this was the school where I wanted to go to. And there were a few people in the company who were Lambdaites, who had been to Lambda. And there was one young woman called Susan Williamson who helped me with my audition. And then I made the big journey to London, which was a huge thing for me at that age. And I did the audition, and I got in, and I was 16. You know, I wasn't even 17, but I would be 17 by the time I went. But blow me, the lady who got me there, when I arrived, she actually went to America. She went off to work and start a very, very successful career in the States. She was the founder of a company up in Massachusetts called Shakespearean Company. And it was a very successful career that she had. Sadly, she passed away just last year, Kristen Linklater was her name. And she came back to Scotland and went to Orkney, and she has this voice studio in Orkney, which is based on her principles. So it's an amazing place. And of course, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Orkney, but it's one of the most beautiful islands ever. So that's where the voice studio was. And I was actually hoping to visit her sometime. And sadly, she passed away, as I say. But as I was just saying about the thing about the 60s was anything was possible. It really was, it was a period of great social mobility. You could come from anywhere, be anybody, and you were encouraged. You were positively encouraged. And not only were you encouraged in terms of enthusiasm by the people around you, but you were encouraged by the governments. You know, I had a grant, and I was 17. I had no formal previous education. I left when I was 15, left school. And I had a grant where my fees were all paid, my all my stuff that I needed, all my stuff that I worked with was all paid for, and also I had a living allowance of £11 a week. Now, £11 a week in 1961 was a hell of a lot of money. And what really pisses me off, big time, is how we've got to where we've got to now, where education is at a huge premium. It's far worse in America, let me tell you. But here, it's ridiculous. Whereas there was this kid who came, and that was not a rich time. That was a pretty poor time. But there was that impetus to get people educated, to get people, and no matter what subject you were attracted to, what subject you wanted to do. And I was given the opportunity of a lifetime. And of course, it was the great period of the Beatles, and musically, culturally, everything was up for grabs. And it was the most extraordinary time. And it's a time that I am incredibly grateful for. Over to you.
Obviously, you spoke about how the theatre was somewhere you're clearly very comfortable at. From your time, it seems on stage, playing Shakespeare is where you're truly at home, and that's demonstrated in the critical acclaim of the plays you played in the West End in your debut. What I wanted to find out exactly was perhaps when did you first get exposed to Shakespeare, and what is it about being a Shakespearean actor that you think has helped you throughout your career?
Well, my first theatre job after leaving drama school was I came up to Edinburgh. I joined the Royal Exchange. And while I was at the Royal Exchange, there was a man called Peter Dews who was doing a production of Galileo, and I was going to be playing Adr Session in this production. Now, Dews was a Yorkshireman, so he was very like that. He talked like that, and everything was very practical. And he was an extraordinary, again, a teacher, an actual teacher. And he was able, what we did was we did As You Like It. And he was tremendous in understanding. I was playing Orlando, understanding the whole thing about Orlando's situation, that he was the middle son of Roland du Bois, and he was treated in the way he was treated, and he was treated like a peasant. But he also, and it's a great play, As You Like It. It's a mainly prose play, so it's very easy to translate and work on, because the poetry it's not as powerful. It's there, but it's not as, it's more of a prose play. So Peter just used to take me through it and make me imagine this guy's state, who was educated for one thing, but he wasn't allowed to be that. And also he had a certain ignorance about courtly love. He didn't understand it. He was awkward. And then he meets this, in the forest of Arden, he meets this wonderful young man called Ganymede, who is actually a young lady in disguise. It's Rosalind. And she teaches him how to behave, and he learns from her. And at the same time, he finds himself falling in love with this boy, so he's a bit worried about it at the same time. But it's the most beautiful play, As You Like It. And it deals with youth consciousness. It deals with the consciousness of a young man coming to understand something that's beyond his ken. And also because he's been kept in a particular position within the household, he's been treated like a servant. He doesn't understand. So this young woman takes him step by step through the whole of his learning about courtly love, he's learning about manners, he's learning about how he's placed in his relationship with young women. And it's a brilliant play. It's a really wonderful play. And it's also very funny. It has great comics. And of course, it's got one of the great speeches of all time, which is Jaques' speech about all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and each man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. And so the whole intelligence of Shakespeare and the whole sensitivity and humanism of him. So we did this play, and we did it. It was my debut in the West End, and I was 21. And it went incredibly well. But also, it collided with the whole Carnaby Street culture, the whole design culture, the whole clothes of the 1960s, that kind of slightly hedonistic feeling that was going on around you. I wasn't hedonistic, sadly, but there you go. But it was just amazing that you could that the world was ready for it. And this was the other thing about the 60s. They were ready for these plays which identified sort of the surges of youth. And again, came to London, did it. I was 21. It was my debut in London. It just, everything fell into my lap. It was just extraordinary. But at the same time, I wanted to be an actor. Now, this is one of the things that kind of happens nowadays, is that, people want instant success. They want it now, or they're not prepared to do the work. But in those days, you had to do the apprenticeship. You had to go through the process. I mean, I think of an actor like Ian Holm, who's a wonderful actor, but Ian Holm spent 10 years at Stratford before he ever played a role. So there was a true apprenticeship about being an actor. But nowadays, we live in a culture where we want everything yesterday. But in those days, that was the deal. You learned the job. So I went back to Birmingham, and I did a season where I played Othello. No, I didn't play Othello. I played Iago. And it was at the time when a white actor did play Othello, called Michael Gambon, and he played Othello. You couldn't do that now, thank God, but that's what they did then. And I also did Peer Gynt, which was I mean, the interesting, this goes back to a conversation that I had with Peter Jews when I was in Scotland. He said, "Lovey, I'm going to Birmingham Rep," he said, "and I'd like you to come. What would you like to play?" And I went, "Oh, Hamlet, all right. Anything else?" I said, "Iago, all right, okay, that's all right, yeah. Anything else?" I said, "Well, what about Peer Gynt?" "Oh, yeah, we'll do Peer Gynt, that's right, we'll do that." And I couldn't believe it. I thought he was bluffing. But actually, I played all of those roles except Hamlet, which I was really disappointed about. But anyway, so it was amazing to be there at that time. And then to have this man, he was a school teacher initially. He'd studied here. He was one of those first of those kind of grammar school working class graduates that came in Oxford at the beginning of really just after the war, the beginning of the 50s, and an amazing time. There's extraordinary characters who came out of that, and Peter was one of them. And Peter had this amazing down-to-earth thing of teaching you how to do Shakespeare, how to speak it. And the first play that after we did As You Like It, the Shakespeare play we did next was Othello. And he took me through the role of Iago. And there's this scene where Iago starts the whole jealousy movement, and by the end of the scene, Othello goes absolutely crazy. But he was able to do it detail after detail after detail, we did it. We rehearsed in his office. So what he realized was that Othello would have his desk taken out. So he just had a carpet that he sat on, and I was at a desk. And, the dialogue it starts off with, "Did Michael Cassio, when you wooed my lady, know of your love? He did, Iago. Why dost thou ask? Oh, but for satisfaction of my thought, no further harm. Why have thy thought, Iago? Well, I did not think," and this is how it went. It was gradual. And by the end of the scene, it's crazy, because he's led Othello into this, beware the green-eyed monster that doth feed jealousy, that doth feed the thing it feeds on, the curse the thing it feeds on. And Peter had this way of just taking you through it. So then Shakespeare just became natural. It became absolutely, it was just like mother's milk. There was no difficulty in it. But he removed the difficulty by understanding the fundamentals of it. And then from those fundamentals, and then moving to understanding the iambic. And the iambic is, there's a the most brilliant example of the iambic and the use of the iambic pentameter is in Hamlet, in the scene between Ophelia and Hamlet. So you have the most formal of speeches, which is to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, and by a sleep no more to say I forget the words, anyway, that's what it is. And Hamlet does this speech, and then on comes Ophelia, who's been prompted by her father to really find out what's going on and where Hamlet is in this whole scenario. And she comes on, and she has these tokens of their love that she returns to him. And she starts off, she says, "My honor, I humbly how does your honor of this many a day? I humbly thank you. Well. My lord, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. I never gave you aught. Why, my lord, you did." And then it breaks into prose. It goes straight into prose. So the verse gets put aside, and the prose takes over and starts beating out the rhythm. Are you honest? Are you fair? That if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty. Could beauty, my lord, be such a thing as with honesty? Aye. And then it tumbles in a certain way that it drives and drives and drives. And finally, this poor girl is sort of blasted by this craziness of, I have heard of your paintings. God has given you one face, yet you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, you list, you nicknames God's creatures and make your wantonness your ignorance. Go to, I'll have no more. It had made me mad. And she's going, oh my Lord. So there's this kind of counterpoint that's going on all the way through the scene. And then at the end of the scene, he exits. And she has this, oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown, soldiers, courtiers, scholars, I quite down. And it goes back to the verse. And what it tells you is this girl is so imprisoned, she can't express herself other than in the verse. She cannot express herself in prose. It is impossible. So once you've been given that illumination from a very good director, it all follows suit. So you begin to look, in all the plays, you begin to look for those journeys that the characters are making. And he's the best. There's no question. The bard is the best. That answer your question?
Absolutely.
Good.
Your love for Shakespeare obviously comes from a time of nurturing, and you mentioned how
Absolutely.
the 60s were incredibly nurturing, both for you and for the youth of that time, the grants you got and the support you had. In recent times, unfortunately, it seems that we've seen cuts in the arts from the government and schools who deem it as a non-essential activity or subject. If you had one sentence to say to these advocates for arts funding cuts, what would it be?
It would have to be more than a sentence, I'm afraid. It's iniquitous. But we've done that. We do that with the arts anyway. England, Britain, what have you. It's so ignorant about all of that. It's so ignorant about the need for all of that. And it's the English language. It's, for God's sake, this is our language. And the greatest purveyor of that language is Shakespeare. And so therefore, it's a given for everybody in this room to be able to speak that language and to be able to express that language. So the arts is vital in that way. It's vital in terms of how we understand who we are, where we are, and also where we're going. And of course, politicians don't get it. And yet they themselves have been educated that way. The good ones have been educated that way, but they somehow, when it comes to the real understanding of what's going on, they kind of go, oh no, well, we'll put that aside, it's too expensive, we can't afford it. But it's vital. And again, that was the great thing about the 60s. They poured money in. The Arts Council was a vibrant enterprise. They poured money into the arts, and it was never so good as that time. And it kind of rapidly went downhill. And it was socially free. We weren't bound by anything. If you could come and deliver and do something, you were encouraged. And nowadays, it's so, I don't want to, it sounds a bit, I don't want to be too whatnot about it, but, for instance, this whole thing of everybody's wrongly, I think, attacking the public school system. Well, you can, but not in that way. So they're about the fact that they have these elaborate theaters, and you get the Benedict Cumberbatches and the Eddie Redmaynes, and you get these wonderful actors. They're really good actors. I have absolutely huge admiration for them. But they've been brought up in these public school, these conditions where the theater has become tantamount. It's there. There are these amazing kind of theaters in these schools. And so therefore we get all these, actors from a certain class coming in. It's not their fault, it's the way it is, and they're talented and they deserve to do it. But the other end of the social scale is totally ignored. It would be impossible now for somebody of my age, my age then, becoming an actor, because there isn't the pathway, there isn't the way to get to it. It's excluded, and it's become class. It's become class-ridden in a way where you were trying to get rid of that in the 1960s, and it's kind of retrograded. So somebody like me now, it would be very, very difficult for them to get started. Whereas for me, I was only encouraged. The way was open for me right from the word go, and I'm blessed because of that. But I look at some, and there is the talent that gets through, but it's much more of a struggle for them now. And, and it's all about money, it's all about class, it's all about those awful things that I'm afraid this country still represents: feudalism, keep in your place, don't rise above yourself, remember who you are. And it's all bollocks. and I can't believe that I'm in 21, and that's retrograded so much. When I think of the vision of the time when I was a young man, when I was in my teenagehood, what was possible was extraordinary, and now it's imploded on itself.
Yeah. Going into the work that you do, having originated the role of Hannibal Lecter, your reputation for portraying villains is well documented and quite well known. Most recently, your portrayal of Logan Roy in Succession.
He's a very nice man. Misunderstood, very misunderstood.
As landed you many plaudits and accolades. I was wondering what you thought the key ingredients to portraying such a misunderstood character is, and do you enjoy doing it?
Rule number one, if any actors in the room, rule number one is you never, ever, ever judge your character. That's fatal. That's not your job. That's the job of the audience. The audience do that. That's what they do. That's up to them, and they can judge it how they want to judge it. What you must do is understand. I mean, look, you look at babies. Adolf Hitler was a baby. Hannibal Lecter was a baby. Ted Bundy was a baby. You know who Ted Bundy was? Yeah. And you think of them, you think of these guys and gals as babies. That woman that Charlize Theron played in that movie, where she played the killer, I can't remember her name. Anyway, she was a baby. So you think, well, they're babies. So what happens to these babies? What is their journey? And you realize that their journey is sometimes a hell of a journey. Sometimes it's a great journey. Sometimes it's a beautiful journey. But then they become something else. And time becomes something else. But there are also conditions that create that. Sometimes it's mental conditions. Sometimes it's social conditions. For example, I played Hermann Goering in the Nuremberg process, it was called. And Goering was an interesting kid. He was the most decorated air ace after von Richthofen. And he was greatly affected by the Treaty of Versailles, which was an iniquitous treaty to the people of Germany. It was iniquitous. There was no question about that. And it left people in a very, very fragile and kind of raw state. Goering took his squadron, he flew it into Switzerland, he abandoned it there because he was so disgusted by what happened. Then he walked all the way back and kept on going till he arrived in Sweden. And he stayed in Sweden, and he had a breakdown, mental breakdown. And then he heard about this young Austrian painter who was doing all this extraordinary work in Austria. And he then thought, this young man, I have to put my money behind him. I have to get behind him. And that was Adolf Hitler. And we have to also understand that in the first part of the 20th century, democracy did not exist. There was no democracy. It was absent. And there was only the polarities of socialism and communism, or fascism on the one hand. And these were choices that people had to make. And of course, Germany went down the wrong road, and it became horrendous. But there was a human being in the middle of it making these errors. And in Goring's case, he was very bright, very smart, and he was a great Anglophile. He loved, but also he had, for example, on Kristallnacht, he was rescued by two Jewish women because he was severely, he nearly died. And these nursed him back to health. He also married an actress, and he was also slightly fantastical. He was also a cross-dresser as well. So he was this extraordinary character, brilliant, and a brilliant manager of Adolf. Come the Nuremberg process, and he watched these films of that which was truly horrific and the worst thing that probably ever happened in the 20th century. But he himself went into denial because he couldn't deal with it. He really couldn't cope with it. And he tried, and he knew he was going to be found guilty, but he wanted to be punished as a soldier. So he wanted to be shot. He didn't want to be hanged. And he, of course, was sentenced to be hanged. And somehow or other, he managed to get a piece of poison, and he poisoned himself. But so that's an interesting journey. That's an interesting journey of a human being who starts off as one thing and becomes incredibly flawed. So you look at that journey, and that's what the actor does. That's what the actor should do. That's your preparation, is you look at them, you look at the man, you look at the woman, and you see them in their own right and how things affect them and make them go down a wrong road. That's what happens. And they don't even know they're on that road until sometimes it's too late, that the revelation comes. And with Goering, I mean, I remember I was playing Goering, and I'm thinking, at what point does he become a real denier? When does he deny? And I was trying to find the point when he was going to deny, and it was given to me by those horrendous films of the Holocaust and the bodies all piled up. And there was one sequence where there's a young woman dug out of a grave, and they bring her out of the grave. And the thing in that was, most of the images you have of that are people shaved off, people cadaverous looking, people who don't look human at all. But there was this young woman, and she came out, they took her out of the grave, and her hair fell down. It was long. She had all this hair. She was long. It was long hair. And I thought, that's the moment he denies, because he sees the reality of it. And he says, this is too much. Looking at all those other corpses was nothing. But looking at this one corpse, which was so human because of it was intact. And that, I thought, that's when he says, no, not true, didn't happen, I'm not there, I'm not part. So that's what you do as an actor. You find those beats, those rhythms, those moments, those little visions of things that enable you to do it. And that's why I believe it's vital as an actor that you do not judge. So when you're coming to Logan Roy, you see this guy, and there's all the things that are attached to him, but the thing about him is his secret. What is Logan's secret? Who is he? Where is he from? And then Jesse Armstrong gives you little suggestions where you don't even talk about it. Like one day he goes out for a swim, and you see these scars on his back. And you don't play anything. You just said, these are the scars on his back. And then, and this is the funny thing that happened. So I'm playing Logan Roy, and I get offered the job, and I'm asked by my kind of American manager, Matthew. He said, Brian, there's this, they're going to be doing this thing called, I don't know what it's called, Successor? No, Successive? No. Succession. It's called Succession. And they're interested in you playing this guy, this sort of, he's a kind of Rupert Murdoch character, I don't know. So, it's only a one-season part, but, I think you might be good. It might be interesting. So I get this call, and I'm meeting, what's his name? Adam McKay, who was the first director-producer. He's in L.A., and Jesse is in Italy, and I'm in London. And I get the call, and we talk about this show, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually I say, so this is a one-season part. And there was a big pause on either side of the Pacific and Atlantic. And then finally they go, oh, no, it's got to be in more than one season. I go, oh, okay. So, and then I suggested to them, I said, Logan, it's a Scottish name. In fact, ironically, there's a thing called Logan Air, which is a Scottish airline. My wife pointed it out to me today, and I thought, oh yeah, he owns that. Anyway, so I think to myself, well, he could be Scots. It's very likely he could be Scots. And Jesse says, oh, no, he can't be Scots. He's got to be American. He has to be American. I said, okay. And then Adam McKay says, I don't think that's a bad idea. And I said, well, I'll let you sort it out. And said, anyway, as it came, he was Canadian. So I start the show, and my Canadian accent isn't very good. So I thought, I'll do American, I'll never know the difference. So we've started the show, and we've done 9 episodes. And we get to the 9th episode, and Peter Friedman, who plays Frank, who I keep firing and rehiring throughout the show. He says, oh, I've just done an ADR session. Now, ADR is a thing called additional dialogue required. And it's a session whereby they dub or post-sync lines that they want to rewrite and put them in. So he said, I've done this session, and they've changed your birthplace. And I went, oh, really? Well, so where am I? Because I was born in Quebec, you know. He said, yeah, we've changed it. I said, so where am I born now? He said, oh, I don't remember. I can't remember. He said, let me see. So he gets his device out and he goes, oh, yeah, here we are. Somewhere called Dundee, Scotland. And I said, but that's where I was born. And he said, oh, that's a coincidence. I said, yeah, but, you know, he said, and I was flabbergasted. So I go up to Jesse and I said, what's this? What's going on? Oh, we thought it'd be a little surprise. I said, it's a hell of a surprise. For 9 episodes, I've been playing this American, and suddenly you say I'm born in Dundee, Scotland. What's going on? He said, oh, you left Dundee very early. And there was a form of kinder transport, so which is right. So this is always an ongoing thing, you know, because writers can be very secretive, and this was a big secret. And so anyway, I did that, and then below me, they did an episode called Dundee, where they went back to Dundee, which I never thought they would do. And suddenly there's all this kind of synchronicity going on, which kind of was a bit worrying, a bit scary. And it's also doubly because when I was a young actor, people said, you know, Brian, it's going to be the long haul for you. I mean, you know, and I'm not complaining, I did very well, I've got no complaints. But at the end of the day, it was so strange because I thought, long haul, I've been in this business 60 years, you know, and suddenly this role comes along and you go, well, you can't get around it. It's a great role. It's a fantastic role. But playing Logan is that what you have to do with Logan is you've got to understand everything from his point of view. Now, he's hated by people, but people love to hate him. People always come up to me with a device and say, can you tell me to fuck off? And I very gladly say, fuck off. And they photograph it, so there. So it's kind of weird. It's so strange, you know, and my swearing has got considerably worse as a result. But it's just odd how life pans out, and then finally you get this synchronicity of things, and now the show is gone. I mean, we did the premiere the other night, and, well, you were there, so it was ridiculous. It was like a rock concert. You know, there was 2,500 people at the Royal Festival Hall, and people just went wild for the show. And I find it extraordinary, and it's such a reflection on this day and age where we're so confused about stuff that we see these people that we love to hate. We love being in the presence of these people we can't stand, and yet we get this frisson from them. And the worst example of that, or the best example of that, is I'm in. I got a Golden Globe, and I'm in L.A., and a friend of mine, Rosanna Arquette, has got an evening where it's a Me Too afternoon, really, and there's Ronan Farrow talking about the Me Too, and talking about Harvey Weinstein, horrible. Anyway, talking about these people in Me Too, and all these Hollywood women, very intense, listening to all this really serious stuff and going, yeah, this is terrible, this is awful, yeah, this is really bad, and oh yeah, these guys who get away with it, how monstrous they all are, and it's all going on like this, and everybody's nodding their heads in agreement and saying, yeah, it's true. So Ronan finishes an incredible presentation of his book, and everybody breaks into applause and thanks him and everything, and it all goes, you know, as it should do. But then they all turn around. And I was afraid, so I'm standing at the back, sort of watching all this, and suddenly all these women are coming at me with their devices. And they're going, can you tell us to fuck off? There's something majorly wrong here. This is a Me Too meeting where they're discussing the obvious things of Me Too, and you are asking a white dinosaur to tell you to fuck off? We're fucked as a result. But that's true. That's what happened. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Logan Roy is Scottish. Surprise, surprise. You're Scottish. Unlike writers, you're probably less secretive about your politics over the years.
Oh, yeah. You're going to get onto that, yeah?
Of course, as a supporter of like Scottish independence, I wanted to ask what you think, when you think Scottish will leave the UK.
Well, you have to look at my history in relationship to politics. I mean, I did the Labour Party, the general election of 1997. I was the voice of Labour throughout the whole campaign. And they got the biggest majority ever. And I was there on this. Thank you. I helped a bit. Anyway, so they got this huge majority, and it was one of the most exciting moments of my life was being there on the South Bank and watching everybody, the whole thing, and the possibility of change, radical change, which I was hoping would ensue. Didn't quite work out that way. And so then our erstwhile prime minister of the time decides that there is this crisis in the Middle East. And Iraq, there's the invasion of Kuwait, and then there's this big gap. This is under the old Bush. There's a big gap, and then the young Bush comes around. And it's subsequently realized that these guys are looking for an excuse to get at, which is now ironic because everybody wants to get away from oil, and those days they wanted to get the oil. And it was Halliburton was the main company. And it was a company of which Dick Cheney was one of the high-head ones. And so there's Cheney, there's Rumsfeld, and there's Bush, who's a puppet, really. And we've seen his puppetry because of what happened in 9/11, which was quite obvious, absent that he disappeared. Anyway, so this happens. And then our prime minister decides to get into bed with these guys. I mean, did anybody see the Blair Brown thing on the television there's wonderful Blair Brown television things. And I couldn't believe it when I watched this guy who I really admired at one time in my life, and I was very hopeful for. And he gets up and he says, "Oh, we didn't realize what was going to happen in the Middle East." And you go, "Are you a fucking idiot? You cannot add 2 and 2 and make 4? I mean, it's clear if you upset something, the knock-on effect is obvious." And that's what happened. And that's why we have the state that we have now. That's why we have the rise of ISIS, the rise of all kinds of extremism. And it goes directly back to that moment, I think. That's what I feel. I may be wrong, but I think that's true. And so at that, there comes a point when I'm really mourning social democracy. Social democracy seems to be missing. And it seems to be going. And I've been a strong member of the Labour Party, but I'm seriously worried about the party. I think what's going to happen, is it going to recover? My view is it hasn't quite recovered. It's never really quite recovered since then. Even though the failed geography teacher had some great, I'm talking about Corbyn, had some great ideas, but he was not able to execute them because he didn't have he had a charisma bypass. So, thank you. So I'm thinking, where is social democracy? And then I look to my country, to this group of people who I used to laugh at. 30 years ago, I used to laugh at, I called it the ski and do party. It was, it was guys in kilts with knives in their socks. That was the kind of party that the Scots Nats were. And I think the word national is somewhat contentious. But I realized that there's something very positive going on there. And so I decide to throw my lot in with this for Scottish independence, because I believe that this United Kingdom is, sorry, but it's completely fucked. And it's been fucked for a long, long time. And people have allowed it to get more and more fucked. And with this bunch of tossers we've got at the moment, the Jacob Rees-Moggs and and the fucking Michael Gove, treacherous little Scottish bastard that he is, and the horrible Eton clown, this kind of Danny Kaye, Monkey fat one, I mean, really, I just think I can't believe it. I can't believe I've lived 75 years and we've come to this point where we're ruled by idiots. Total fucking idiots. Sorry, but it's the way I feel. And so I think, well, at least if we can get away, if we can release ourselves, and then there's the Brexit thing, where Alistair Campbell, who, was a debatable character, he and I become big friends because we were absolutely anti-Brexit. We just thought it was the worst thing. Alistair's still mourning it, and I just keep, because his parents were from Scotland and moved to Yorkshire, and I kept saying, Alistair, go back to Scotland. Go back. You can go back. They'll have you back there. I know you were the point man for Tony Blair, but go back. You'll be fine. And now it's a mess. It's a real mess. Because, and we will, and then we had the 62% that we voted to stay a part of the European community. And the suffering that's going on is now ridiculous. I mean, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. You very carefully hold your foot up and shoot off each toe individually. Yeah. Anything else?
Actually, we have like less than 5 minutes left, so there might be a chance for just one or just audience questions. So I'm looking to the floor for a question.
That lady there.
Yeah, that lady there.
I'm Maria, nice to meet you. I was just wondering, you said you grew up in like a time where it was very egalitarian, there was equal opportunity specifically in the arts, and today I feel like you were saying it's harder, specifically for actors, people in film. I want to be a director when I'm older, but I was wondering, how do you think young people can like climb the ranks and make a name for themselves today?
It's a struggle, but in a way, it's the challenge, and you got to step up to the challenge. There's no easy answers now. There were certain conduits, there were certain bridges that were available to me and to my contemporaries. It's gone. It isn't there. And you've got to fight that much harder. And, don't give up the struggle. I mean, the best advice is follow your bliss. Follow your bliss wherever your bliss leads you. Because that's what it is. That's what makes you be what you want to be. And you've got to struggle to do that now. But I think it's probably a good struggle to have, actually, ironically. Yeah? Well, you do it. Sorry, Michael, I'm sorry.
That's cool. On that note, I'm going to just quickly go on to talk about your book.
My book.
Last question.
I forgot about that, yeah.
So, the last question.
I was eager to get some more questions.
Let's do it. Let's do
all
it.
Right, come on. They're going to ask some questions.
Okay.
I mean, I can talk about the book anytime.
Over there.
Hello.
Just a quick question. Do you find it completely coincidental that Succession gained so much momentum at the time when Trump was at the driver's seat?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Our first day read-through was Trump's election in 2016. And I remember everybody was... I was less than optimistic, I have to say. So everybody was saying, let's go, we're all going back to hopefully celebrate Hillary's win, which I kind of knew wasn't going to happen because I think she lost it as much as he won it. Because American politics is, we think our politics is bad. American politics is bad from a very different kind of viewpoint, but it's pretty awful. And I knew that it was, and then when, sometimes they say the country gets the president they deserve. And I think at that time, Trump was being well deserved. And it was horrific because it's the most horrible time of my life has been living. I have 2 boys, in New York. I live in New York, so my 2 sons are American. And for them, it was appalling because this man was the worst example of everything, anything. Self-aggrandizing, horrific, idiot, fucking idiot. And I felt sorry for my boys because they kept thinking, is this the criteria by which I live? And we're really on bad times. It's really tough with the climate going to shit, the COVID. I mean, doesn't anybody ever seen the connection between COVID and the climate crisis? If you think about it, it's an interesting thought that COVID came just before the climate crisis got worse. Now, why did we get COVID? What was COVID about? I mean, it was a virus. It's a horrible virus. But why now? Why suddenly do we all have this extraordinary, horrific thing which has wiped out a lot of people? But it's also a stop button has been pressed and said, you've gone far enough, humans. You're fucking up the world. We're going to fuck you up for a bit and see what happens. Maybe you'll learn some fucking lessons from this. And I think there is a relationship in the great scheme of things. I'm not a great believer in God, but there's some kind of alchemical relationship between these 2 events.
Yes, I think that's the end of
I've
questions.
got to talk about the book, apparently. Sorry about that.
Basically, you recently produced a book called Putting the Rabbit in the Hat. In it, you talk about infant determinism, and I quote, "The infant determinism will be tossed and thrown in its pursuit. I would challenge oceans in pursuit of the reason why. Why be an actor? And the ocean and in the ocean, I'll get severely drenched." I wanted you to talk to us about what you meant by that and what infant determinism means for you.
Well, there is the question why being an actor. I mean, on a deeper level, there is a question why being an actor. What does it mean? Because of the other arts, there's painting, there's music. We don't paint, we only use ourselves. And again, it goes back to the bard. It goes back to Shakespeare's Hamlet's advice to the players. Speak the speech as I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it as many of your players do, I did leave the town crier spoke my lines. And it ends with, as it were, holding the mirror up to nature. That's what our job is. That's what we do. We reflect what's going on in every aspect of humanity. That's what we do. And so that becomes why being an actor. A lot of people think, it's a bit precious. But I don't think so at all, because that's a question I've asked myself. And it came from when I was 3. And my dad, in Scotland, Hogmanay is a big festivity. And when I was a boy, it was just huge, and people would go around houses doing what they call first footing, where you came in, you took your bit of coal and you brought good fortune to the house for the years. It was a great tradition. So my dad, my late dad, the house would be full of his drunken cronies, they were all there. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, they'd get me up, they'd bring me to the bunker, the coal bunker, which was in the recess, and I would and my sister would encourage me to sing. And I would do Jolson impersonations. Now, nobody knows who Jolson is now, but Jolson was a Jewish cantor who sang songs, and he did it with blackface. I, of course, at the age of 3, did not do the blackface. But anyway, so I'm singing these songs. I mean, ironically, how does a 3-year-old sing things like, "Climb up on my knees, sonny boy"? It seems a bit ironic. Anyway, so I'm singing these songs, and I'm getting the feeling in the room. It's the feeling of the room. The energy in the room changes. There's a sort of harmony, there's a kind of coming together, there's a sort of thing that a group kind of long to do and long to have the experience of doing, which is why we have churches, why we have theaters, why we have performing spaces. But it's not about, we're the catalyst. We're the ones that provide that sense of harmony, but it's about the audience. It's about what's going on in the room. And that's what really appealed to me. That's what stuck with me, is that experience, which is why I wanted to act. Because when I acted, that experience was created. And you could cut it with a knife. It was so tangible and true. And that's where I think that one has to really look at yourself. And if you want to be an actor, you should look at it and say, why do I want to act? Because there's also ego, no question about it. There's also the show-off element. I was always a limelighter as a wee boy. But there's something beyond that. There's something that really travels beyond that. And that's the thing that has interested me in my entire life, which is, why do I do it? And what is the purpose of it? And it's as sacred to me as church. Because there's no defined God or defined religion or defined anything. It's about we as the community come to some kind of harmonic understanding. We create an atmosphere that we don't know how to identify it, but we feel it very deeply in ourselves. And that, to me, is the most valuable thing to be part of.
Thank you very much, Brian.